because some people at work are not necessarily satisfied with what they're doing. They don't feel fulfilled. Um, and sometimes that comes in the form of what their mindset is. Is their mindset maybe more of an entrepreneurial mindset where you want to do something on your own that's going to make money and make you feel good? Other times it could just be flat out you're not in the right job. You're not in the right, maybe you're not in the right profession at all. And you need to venture off and try to find out what are the things that you enjoy doing. What are the things that bring you gratification every single day? You've got to find the time to go through that analysis in your head and maybe sometimes talk out loud about it, to find out what that is.
Too often we don't have the time because we are so much into our 8-hour work shift, 10-hour work shift, whatever that is. We just are emotionally exhausted. Our brain is exhausted by the end of the day to find that additional time to spend and figure out what is my true calling.
But you've got to put the time into it. I think that's the biggest point I'm making here is you've got to find the time to look at yourself and see what is something or some things that you enjoy doing in order to feel a certain way and to get to that sense of accomplishment or fulfillment that I said earlier. And sometimes if you don't have that, it's not worth it to you to even go down the road of accomplishing a certain goal or task that maybe you quote unquote have to do. So this whole notion of having to do something can sometimes be that big burden that leads to you being like not willing to do something, not being energized or motivated to do something. And that shouldn't necessarily deem you lazy. So understanding what lazy is and where it comes from. Like at the end of the day, if like I wake up on the wrong side of the bed and I just feel really tired and sluggish and I don't want to do anything, yeah, I could say that I'm being lazy, right? But if I don't have a true understanding what's going to get me up in the morning and like say, okay, this is what I'm going to tackle, this is what I'm going to do, and these are things I want to do, I am going to do it. If you have an affirmation, a confident, bold statement to say to yourself about what you're going to do with your day, that will help in overcoming that sense of laziness.
Work in many sense could be considered as a bridge that allows us to enjoy time with our family, with our friends, and allow us to pay bills and do everything else. It doesn't have to be necessarily the thing that defines us, because guess what? After 30, 50 years, whatever many years that you work towards your industry, you're going to retire, and then your work is not going to define you. And if you have tied your identity to work and found that to be the primary source of meaning and purpose, well, that identity is in ways gone by the time you have retired. Now, what will define you, right? So then you will have that crisis during that period. So isn't it more worthwhile to figure out, independent of our profession and everything else, who do I want to be and what do I value?
If you know what your why is, right? Why I get up every day, right? Then everything you do for that why should be in some element fulfilling or satisfying. But in saying that, it's easier said than done, because you could have all the interest in the world, but if you're not honing in on something specific, you may be very scattered throughout your day, and that can lead to some problems. That can lead to you maybe just overthinking. You mentioned earlier perseverating, playing the what if game, and then before you know it, that day is over. And so now you're looking toward the next day of what can I do to make up for the day before, and you start to snowball into something you don't necessarily you didn't intend on doing it that way, but it just spiraled out of control. So for me, I use meditation, right? So spirituality is very important to me, and I like to think I have a very strong faith in my everyday. But meditation really allows me to take a step back, take a moment to place myself in a setting that I can just breathe and have the moment to relax and settle down from whatever it is my mind is spiraling out of control about. So sometimes I'll go to meditation in order to kind of bring me back, center me a little bit, and then I can proceed forward with my day. I do sometimes pride myself on being a positive person, looking at the glass half full, but there are many times that I get very negative, that I start to, again, as you said, perseverate and think about things so many different ways that I tend to like almost think the reverse of it. And instead of like thinking about what I can confidently accomplish and be productive, I start to think about the things that are so challenging and difficult that are not going to allow me to be productive and happy. And those take control of what I'm doing every single day. That is very troublesome. And so again, taking a step back, trying to center yourself, I think is a good solution to handle that problem, to handle that task.
When you bring up we brought up something about how our mind is inclined in 75% of the time to think negatively in many sense. Many times it's the emotional brain that is trying to look out for threat in many places. Even though threat really doesn't exist, it is trying to identify, it's trying to play it safe, because the one of the major function of the emotional brain is your survival. It looks at everything and everywhere as the jungle, and therefore it has to survive, and therefore it has to either be on a fight or flight mode. It has to either be overly reactive and be aggressive with someone, or it has to be extremely scared and run away from that situation. So that is the emotional brain. And of course, as I talked about earlier, the frontal lobe, which is the logical part of the brain, that is the human mind, that it wants to look at facts and figure and wants to make a logical decision, delayed gratification. Our day-to-day training has to be to train ourselves, to train our mind to think more from the logical brain standpoint, then allow the emotional brain to completely take over. Again, I use the word, well, two words. I use train and train and practice, in other words. And the second one is allowing, right? We allow our emotional brain to take over, and therefore 75%, as you brought up that number, 75% of negative thoughts. So training, practice each day to let the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, to kind of do its work.
I've struggled with loving myself. And sometimes that loving yourself is also accepting, again, tying that into what you said earlier, accepting who you are as a person, and knowing that the version of yourself today is not the version of yourself that will be tomorrow. So realizing that and finding ways to love yourself, you bring those two things together, and I feel like it will lead you down a better path of finding that motivation, that energy, that spice to wake up and do what you need to do at work.